All right, let's jump right in. We're going to tackle a topic that's, right at the very heart of the Christian faith. It's all about that critical and, let's be honest, often really complicated relationship between what we say we believe and how we actually live our lives. And this tension, it's a huge deal for how the rest of the world sees the faith.
Have you ever heard someone say this, or something like it? It's a pretty sharp criticism you hear a lot from non-believers, and it can stop a conversation dead in its tracks. It points right to this idea that there's a disconnect, a gap between the claims of faith and the reality of life. And that's exactly what we're going to dig into.
Now, this isn't just some random observation. It's a question that theologians have been wrestling with for a long, long time. In fact, it was the subtitle of a really provocative book by Ronald Sider called The Scandal of the Evangelical Conscience. He just lays it right out there, and it forces us to ask, hey, if faith is supposed to be so life-changing, where's the change?
So this mismatch, it creates what you could call a credibility gap. In this first part, we're going to look at that observable difference between the ideals Christians talk about and the reality of how many of us are living day to day.
Okay, what's really fascinating and honestly pretty sobering about this is the data. Sider's research looked at 5 big social issues. We're talking divorce, materialism, sexual immorality, racism, and even domestic violence. And the numbers were, well, they were stark. Across the board, the rates among people who call themselves Christians were practically identical to those of non-believers. This isn't just a feeling somebody has, it's a measurable reality.
And the consequence of this is huge. Sider makes this point that in the early church, it was the radically different way Christians lived that drew people in. But today, he says, it's often the exact opposite. The perceived hypocrisy, that gap between what Jesus taught and how his followers act, it actually pushes people away. So this isn't just some internal church squabble. It has a massive impact on its witness to the world.
Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the diagnosis? Let's move on and see how this credibility gap might actually be traced back to an incomplete idea of what faith even is. Let's call it half-faith.
So, what do we mean by half-faith? Well, it's the idea that faith is just something you think or something you say. It's checking the I believe box, but that belief never actually reshapes your actions, your priorities, or who you are. From a biblical point of view, this isn't just a weak faith, it's an incomplete one. It's only half the story.
Think of it like this. True biblical faith is a whole circle made of 2 parts you just can't separate, what you confess and what you live out. If one of those is missing, you don't have the whole thing. A faith that's only confession, it's like a car that looks great but has no engine. It's not going anywhere. Now, this whole idea brings up a classic debate in Christian theology, one you've probably heard before. It's the supposed showdown between the Apostle Paul, the big champion of faith, and James, the champion of works. I mean, on the surface, these 2 verses look like they completely contradict each other, right? Paul says we're justified by faith apart from works. But then James comes along and says a person is righteous by what they do, not by faith alone. So, which one is it? For centuries, people have basically put these 2 in a boxing ring.
But here's the thing. What if they're not fighting at all? The best way to understand this is to see them as 2 pastors, 2 leaders who are dealing with different problems in their communities. They aren't describing 2 different kinds of faith, they're describing 2 sides of the very same coin.
And the proof is right there in their own letters. Paul, the faith guy, is constantly telling people to get to work, to live a life worthy of the calling. And James, the works guy, makes it super clear that your actions have to come from a place of genuine belief, saying you must believe and not doubt. See? They both get it. They both understood that real faith and real action are totally intertwined. Okay, so let's flip this around. Instead of just talking about what faith isn't, let's build a picture of what this true, holistic faith actually looks like. The big idea is that it's not some static thing you just have. It's a dynamic, living, breathing way of life.
Some theologians break it down into these different dimensions. It starts with assent. That's just agreeing that yes, certain things are true. But it can't stop there. It has to move to trust, where you're personally relying on God. And that leads to commitment, a real decision to be loyal. And finally, all of that just naturally overflows into action, the changed life that is the proof of the other 3. It's a whole process, not a one-and-done event.
And of course, the final word on all of this really comes from Jesus himself. He told a super simple story that gets right to the heart of this whole thing, this link between hearing and doing. Just look at this.
Jesus talks about two builders. Now notice this, they both hear his words. The starting line is the same for both of them. The one single difference, the thing that changes everything, is that the wise builder puts them into practice. Hearing God's words without acting on them, that's building your life on sand. It's a foundation that's guaranteed to collapse. Action is what turns belief into solid rock.
So, this all leads us to our final and maybe most important point. Why does any of this matter so much? Because the whole purpose of a faith that's lived out is to become a credible witness to a world that's watching us. The Apostle Paul uses these amazing metaphors to get this idea across. He doesn't say, you're a slightly better version of your old self. He says, you are a new creation. The old stuff is gone, the new is here. And what's our job? To be ambassadors, representing a different king and a different kingdom. And think about it, an ambassador has to live in a way that reflects well on the one they represent. Our lives are the message.
And really, that's the ultimate takeaway. A life that is genuinely aligned with faith isn't about trying to earn your way to heaven or being perfect. It's about becoming a window. It's about living in such a way that your life makes the God you talk about seem believable, credible, and maybe, just maybe, even beautiful to someone else.
So we're going to end with a question, and it's not for me to answer. It's for you. It's for me. When you look at the evidence of your life, your words, your actions, your priorities, what does it actually prove? It's a really challenging thought, and it gets to the very heart of bridging that great divide between faith and life.